In addition to our donors, sponsors, and partners, I really cannot begin to, we are so appreciative and grateful with a partnership with the San Francisco Public Library, because this event really would be very difficult to have. And we are eternally grateful to the San Francisco Public Library. Elaine Castillo. Her photo was there earlier. Elaine Castillo's most recent book is How to Read Now, about the politics and ethics of our reading culture. Her widely acclaimed debut novel, America is Not the Heart, was a finalist for the Al Big Book Award, the Center for Fiction Prize, and the Aspen Words Literary Prize, and was named Best Book of the Year by NPR. The Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, Critics Reviews, the New York Public Library, and many others. Her writing has appeared in Freeman, The Rumpus, Lit Hut, Taste Magazine, Electric, Literature, and elsewhere. Her short film, Amokbang, was commissioned by the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art's Open Space. She is a Savona Foundation Fellow and was a 3-time recipient of the Rosalind Schneider Eisner Prize for prose while at UC Berkeley. She has also been nominated for the Pat Kavanaugh Award, a Pushcart Prize, and a Gatewood Prize. Please welcome, as we have been anticipating this time for a while. Thank you, we're so happy for you to be here. Elaine Castillo.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Yes, I was going to say, it's an honor to be here, especially after I've been telling everyone, and Edwin knows this more than anyone, it's about 19 times I should have come to this festival, and life intervened. So it's a very good feeling to be here tonight. Before I read my keynote, I wasn't here yesterday, which I'm very sad about, so I'm not sure if this was already read, and I just saw this come across my feed this morning, and I'm not on Instagram that much, so I screenshotted it very quickly. So forgive me if I'm not attributing the source correctly. I believe the post was by Janice Sapigao or was sent to the organizers by Janice Sapigao, but the following template comes from the Radius of Arab American Writers. The event organizers and keynote speaker would like to acknowledge that we are gathering during an act of genocide taking place in Gaza, and that the current violence in Palestine is the continuation of decades of colonial violence under Israeli apartheid. We stand in solidarity with victims of genocide in Sudan and Congo, and with the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral homelands this conference is being held, including the Ramaytush Ohlone people. We stand firmly against anti-blackness and recognize that police violence and all white supremacist violence must be named and opposed. These forms of violence, along with transphobic violence being legislated in California and other states, endanger the lives of trans, queer, gender nonconforming, and non-binary people. Therefore, as we begin our event, we wish to underscore that none of us are free until all of us are free, and that all anti-racist, liberationist, and decolonial struggles are intertwined. I've been reflecting a lot recently on things I've been wrong about. It's not an easy place to linger, the wrong, especially at a time geopolitically, socio-historically, even internetically, when it feels particularly urgent to be right, to know wrong clearly and name it in the face of annihilation and despair. The last time I was in San Francisco was last October. And outside City Lights bookstore, I remember saying to a friend then that we were presiding over a genocide. How badly I wish 1 year later to have been wrong. In the last few years, I keep finding myself called to the wrong. Led there again and again, dragged to visit the wrong, kicking and screaming, earth signs don't like to be wrong, and the official line from Virgo culture is we never have been. There's a Virgo there. Wrong about that I'd never love another dog again, the way I loved my first. Wrong about what genre I'm supposed to be writing in. Probably wasn't literary fiction this whole time, it was probably sci-fi fantasy. Wrong about thinking I wouldn't like Tolkien, read Lord of the Rings over the summer, and now I'm a bona fide stan. Turns out 12-year-old boys were right the entire time. Wrong about, for example, a long-held belief I've had about the class divide in my family. The class divide that both sundered and built my entire world. My father, from an upper-middle-class educated family in Vigan, who gave me the first book of thousands, to whose legacy I owed my entire literary and artistic life. My mother, raised in rural poverty in Pangasinan, trampled on her entire life by the people in my father's class, uneasy in her literacy, to whom I owed my political allegiances. I was quite clear and critical about this often uneasy separation and what it said and politicized about our history, my history with art and how it came to live in me. Until one day, my mom gave me a portrait that one of my very young grandnephews on her side had made. It was a portrait based on a photograph of me with my late dog Zena, who had died in my arms a few months prior. I had just canceled an entire book tour that year to care for her in her last weeks, so the portrait was still very difficult to look at. But it was beautifully realized, uncommonly beautiful, considering the artist was 8 years old at the time. So I told my mother, he's a very good artist for his age. She said she knew. She was putting him through school, like many of my nieces and nephews, and had already planned to pay for art school for him when he came of age. Then she said, very casually, well, you know, it's because we had a national artist in the family. I'm sure most people in this room know what a national artist is, but just in case, here's Wikipedia for you. The Order of National Artists of the Philippines is an order bestowed by the President of the Philippines upon Philippine nationals who have made significant contributions to the development of Philippine art. It's the highest state order for artists. The first one was posthumously given to Fernando Amorsolo, probably the country's most emblematic, for good and ill, visual artist. What? Mom, what are you talking about? Well, and she said this again very casually, the way people of that generation can say extremely world-reframing things, usually about their experiences under dictatorship, very casually. Well, you know Grandpa's uncle? Grandpa's uncle was Victorio Edades, your great-granduncle. I don't know if you know who Victorio Edades is. I didn't really. But from what I soon learned from my internet K-hole, Victorio Edades was the so-called father of modern Philippine art. Born in 1895 in Dagupan, Pangasinan, where my mother first met my father at Nazareth Hospital, he was the youngest of 10. 6 of his siblings died of smallpox. He was, like my mother, his grandniece, a barrio kid, poor and provincial. Like Carlos Bolosan, another poor kid from Pangasinan, he worked in the salmon canneries in Alaska, then later relocated to Seattle studying fine arts at the University of Washington. Influenced by the modernist European art of his era, the Cézannes, the Picassos of the time, he began to develop a style that diverted from the classical, conservative strain of art then dominated by the romantic, proto-patriotic, rural Arcadia mode of, say, Fernando Amorsolo. When Edades returned to the Philippines, his first show was a one-person exhibition, 30 paintings, the most notorious of which was called The Builders, a painting that could not have been more different from the classicism of Amorsolo and his acolytes, their bright, idealized country Filipinos and their bright, idealized peasant beauty. When you look at The Builders for the first time, especially with an eye trained on Amorsolo, it can seem quite ugly, confrontationally so. The colors are dark and earthy, the figures distorted and stooped in labor, with heavy black shadows around them, the brushstrokes thick and textural. Both the style and the fact that he chose as his subject matter not the idealized, happy Filipino peasant, but rural laborers unbeautified, toiling in mud and dust, was met with shock and disgust by the conservative artistic elite of the time. Not one painting sold. And yet he started an argument, which is to say a revolution, which is to say a war between classes and class ideologies. What counted as worthy when it came to a subject of art? The war between conservatism and modernism, to edify the world and all in it, or to expose its underseen, underlit, exploited faces. In 1937, Edades and several like-minded artists formed what would be called the 13 Moderns, now understood to comprise the 13 modernist artists responsible for revolutionizing Philippine art in the 1930s and 40s, signaling a definitive break from the pre-war classicism of Amorsolo's generation. Of course, I've only scratched the surface here. Visual art is not my area of expertise, so from what I can glean, there are plenty of arguments and counter-arguments for and against his status as the country's preeminent modernist revolutionary, that he wasn't an artist of the people at all, but just another poverty porn fetishist, that his portrayals of rural, and in particular Igorot women, weren't radical breaks from Amor Solo's romanticism at all, but just one more feather of merely a different color in the cap known as Filipino patriarchy, and its continuing difficulty with conceiving of women as something more than eternally representative allegories, as opposed to, people. Or what if my mom was wrong in the first place? Another casualty to the imprecision of diasporic memory keeping. But even so, by most accounts, the generally agreed upon progenitor of modern Filipino art. I asked my mom if she remembered him. She said, a little bit. He settled back in the Philippines, but not in Pangasinan, so she didn't really see or know him at all. Though she remembered his white American wife, Jean, who came to visit with him, that she was nice, I think she said. Suffice it to say, having a national artist in the clan didn't prevent my mother's family from growing up in poverty, so the Nepo perks are limited, to say the least. But still, I had to contend with all the things I'd been wrong about. I thought I'd been the first artist on her side of the family, and I couldn't have been more wrong. Wrong about what I knew, or thought I knew, about the neat divide in my family, about the way history had worked on them. Wrong, even, about the source of things in me, the roots I'd call the making. The thing is, the most important thing I've taken away from all this is that I don't really give a shit about being Victoria Edatis' great-grandniece. I've seen the paintings, they're fine. I don't like Amor Solo either, so it's not that. It's more that I can sense very clearly how easy it would be to take this history, this lineage, as a prophecy, as confirmation of whatever work I'm here to do, which I can admit aligns in many ways with the work Edatis was here to do. I mean, I do like the reminder that I'm not the first person in the family who came here to fuck some things up. I can sense very clearly how easy it would be to take this history, like much history of struggle, erasure, unfinished revolution, and fragile triumph, and use it as a superhero cape, under which to be powerful, sure, predestined. But I'm not interested in that relationship with history, its eternal rehearsal of staged conflicts. I don't want to hold on to whatever satisfaction that might come from this knowing, or the new self-identity that it might calcify into. I don't want to use its thread to start spinning what Ursula K. Le Guin might call the killer story, some important story about lineage and family rebels and heroes and men. I'd rather hold on to that soft underbelly moment, the oh shit moment of being wrong, the big wide door thrown open the minute what I thought I knew dissolved into what I didn't yet know. It's also why I'm sometimes weary of that familiar plea, usually well-intentioned, which I've even made in my own time, imploring us to know our history. Sure, of course. Knowing your history is one thing. Transforming and being transformed by it is another. Knowing is often the work of being right, and it's important work, to be sure. Our climate of misinformation is very real, and the moral stakes of identifying truth from lie could not be higher. But one of the somewhat sci-fi questions I've been asking myself nowadays is, does empire like it when I'm like this? Because the latest chapter in human history has shown us that empire does indeed like it when we know our history just enough to turn its pain into a bomb. When we only weaponize the knowledge of our history and our oppression, rather than seek to transform it and be transformed by it. Transformation is the work of those willing to risk being wrong, uncertain, unknowing. Our history isn't just the various websites and PhD theses I had to trawl through to learn about Victoria Edatis. It isn't just our books, or even our oral traditions, so fragilely passed down, so easily lost. History is a door, and it's a heavy one. And whether that door looks firmly closed or cracked open is up to us. Because we are not just here to be the angel of history, as Walter Benjamin once described a painting of Paul Klee in On the Concept of History, written during World War II, while in hiding from the ever-lengthening shadow of the Third Reich. His face is turned toward the past, one single catastrophe which keeps piling wreckage and hurls it in front of his feet. The angel would like to stay, awaken the dead, and make whole what has been smashed. But a storm is blowing in from paradise. It has got caught in his wings with such a violence that the angel can no longer close them. The storm irresistibly propels him into the future to which his back is turned, while the pile of debris before him grows skyward. How lucky we are to not be angels of history, but to be humans in history, to be human and mortal, and thus afforded the gift, though some might say curse, of approaching the future head on. How lucky we are to see the angle that the angel of history cannot, the angle not just of catastrophe, but of transformation, the angle not just of harm, unending, but repair. These days I'm as interested in repair as I am in harm. Have to be in this world. And in the spirit of repair, we are not here just to know our history, we are here to transform it. We are not here to honor our ancestors. We are here to surprise them, to repudiate them, to remember what they forgot or dream up what they couldn't imagine, and then to pass the baton. Because one day, those ancestors are going to be us. Are we only going to pass on what Tolkien called in his essay on fairy stories, die-catastrophe, the truest form of catastrophe, complete world-rending tragedy, sorrow, and defeat? Or will we also pass on what Tolkien called eucatastrophe, which he says is the true consolation of all fairy stories? A sudden and miraculous grace, never to be counted on to recur. It does not deny the existence for die-catastrophe of sorrow and failure. The possibility of these is necessary to the joy of deliverance. Eucatastrophe denies, in the face of much evidence, if you will, universal final defeat, giving a fleeting glimpse of joy, joy beyond the walls of the world, poignant as grief. What inheres in us, what descends to us, what survives in us, what there is in us that could not be killed after 100,000 million attempts, that's the heirloom. You are its custodian, for now. And in the time you have, you get to do with it what you will. I'd like to shake Adatis' hand maybe, but I don't need to hold it. It's enough that I can see the door that he and all the people I never knew and have been wrong about, all the people whose graves go unmarked, whose nose I might have, whose laugh sounds like mine, all the people who would find us unimaginable, unforeseen, unexpected, there beyond the walls of the world. I see the door they're holding open. All that's left is to go through it and hold the door open ourselves for the next surprise.